Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Stan and I am your narrator. Do not forget to like video and subscribe to our channel. Let's begin.
The unraveling. The wedding studio smelled of lilacs and fresh linen, an elegant space with cream-colored walls and gold accents that promised happily ever afters. Ethan Rivers sat beside Celeste Morgan on a velvet love seat, their fingers intertwined as the wedding planner, an enthusiastic woman named Patricia, spread fabric swatches across the glass coffee table like a card reader revealing destinies. These ivory napkins with the sage runners would be stunning for an outdoor ceremony, Patricia chirped, her voice bright with professional optimism. And they'd complement the eucalyptus in your bouquets perfectly. Ethan glanced at Celeste, expecting to see the excitement that had characterized their entire planning process, but her smile seemed strained, not quite reaching her eyes. She nodded mechanically, her free hand reaching for her phone on the armrest for the third time in 10 minutes. "What do you think, love?" Ethan asked, squeezing her hand gently. "Oh yes. Beautiful," Celeste murmured, her gaze distant. Patricia continued her presentation, oblivious to the subtle shift in energy. "Now, for your first dance, we have the string quartet you requested on hold, but we need final confirmation by Friday. Have you decided on the song?" Ethan's chest swelled with warmth. "Our song," he said, turning to Celeste. "The one that was playing when we first kissed at the jazz club. Remember?" Celeste's phone buzzed. She glanced down and something flickered across her face, fear, perhaps, or resignation. The color drained from her cheeks. "I need to take this," she said abruptly, standing. She leaned down to kiss Ethan's cheek, her lips cold against his skin. "Just be a minute." He watched her walk toward the hallway, her shoulders tense beneath her cashmere sweater. Patricia filled the silence with details about centerpieces, but Ethan only half listened, his attention on the empty doorway where Celeste had disappeared. Minutes stretched into an uncomfortable length. Patricia excused herself to check on cake samples, leaving Ethan alone with his growing unease. Then his phone lit up. The message was short, brutal in its simplicity. "I can't marry you. I'm so sorry. Please don't look for me." Ethan stared at the words until they blurred. His hands began to shake. He stumbled outside into the autumn afternoon, scanning the parking lot desperately. Celeste's car was gone. In its place, on the hood of his sedan, sat her engagement ring, the diamond catching the fading sunlight like a tiny, mocking star. The aftermath. The apartment felt like a mausoleum of memories. Ethan hadn't opened the curtains in days, maybe weeks. Time had lost its structure, flowing together in a gray wash of sleepless nights and hollow mornings. Empty coffee mugs crowded the counter and unopened mail piled up by the door. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned friends, his mother, his boss, but he couldn't bring himself to respond with anything beyond the bare minimum required to keep his job. He'd become a ghost haunting his own life, drifting through the routines that used to matter. Every corner of the city held reminders. The park where they'd had their first picnic, the theater where she'd rested her head on his shoulder during a terrible movie they'd both pretended to enjoy, the corner bistro where he'd nervously rehearsed his proposal speech in his head. What had he missed? What sign had he been too blind to see? The questions circled endlessly, vultures picking at the corpse of his confidence. On a particularly dark evening in late October, rain hammered against his windows with unusual violence. Ethan found himself walking without destination, letting the downpour soak through his jacket, welcoming the cold as something he could actually feel. The numbness inside was worse than any physical discomfort. He ducked into an unfamiliar doorway to catch his breath and found himself in a bookstore cafe he'd never noticed before. The quiet corner read the hand-painted sign above shelves crammed with weathered novels and poetry collections. The space was warm, lit by amber lamps and smelling of coffee and old paper. A woman emerged from behind the counter, maybe in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled into a messy bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She took one look at his drenched, hollow-eyed appearance and simply said, "Sit. I'll bring you something warm." Nina Cross didn't ask questions. She placed a steaming mug of coffee in front of him, along with a towel, and returned to her work shelving books. The silence was a relief. No platitudes, no forced sympathy, just the quiet patter of rain and the turning of pages. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt like he could breathe. The healing begins. Autumn deepened into gold and crimson, and Ethan found himself returning to the quiet corner almost nightly. It became his ritual, his sanctuary from the wreckage of his planned future. Nina never pried, never pushed, but she noticed when he started arriving a little earlier, noticed when he began actually reading the books instead of staring blankly at pages, noticed the first time he laughed at something she said. "You're doing better," she observed one evening in mid-November, sliding into the chair across from him after locking the door. The cafe was officially closed, but she'd started letting him stay late, the two of them existing in a comfortable pocket of time that belonged to no one else. "Am I?" Ethan asked, surprised by the question. He considered it honestly. "Maybe. Some days." Nina wrapped her hands around her own mug, steam rising between them. "I was married once," she said quietly. He didn't leave dramatically. There was no fight, no betrayal. We just drifted. One day I woke up and realized we were strangers sharing a mortgage. Ethan studied her face, seeing the faint sadness there, but also something else. Acceptance, maybe even peace. "How did you get through it?" "I stopped asking what I did wrong and started asking what I needed to learn." She smiled softly. "I wrote a lot. Terrible poetry mostly. Filled 3 journals with absolute garbage. But it helped." That night, Ethan bought a leather-bound journal from Nina's carefully curated selection. He sat in his apartment until dawn, pen moving across pages, pouring out every confused thought, every unanswered question, every moment of beauty he and Celeste had shared alongside the pain. The next week, Nina asked for his help rearranging the shop's layout. They moved shelves and reorganized sections, their teamwork natural and easy. As they lifted a particularly heavy bookcase, Ethan's hand covered Nina's on the wooden edge. The contact lasted only seconds, but electricity sparked through the touch. Their eyes met. Nina didn't pull away immediately, and in that suspended moment, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in months: possibility. Not the sharp, desperate hope of reconciliation with Celeste, but something gentler. Something like the first green shoot pushing through winter soil. "Thank you," he said softly, though he meant for more than just the help with furniture. Nina's smile reached her eyes. "You're welcome. A new beginning." December arrived with the first snow, transforming the city into something magical and new. Ethan noticed he was thinking about Celeste less, the ache in his chest fading from sharp pain to dull memory. What occupied his thoughts more often now was the way Nina tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, or how she hummed old jazz standards while organizing inventory. Their friendship had deepened into something neither of them named but both recognized. They shared meals, takeout containers spread across the cafe table after hours. They took long walks through the snowy streets, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Nina told him about her dream of expanding the bookstore, maybe adding a small performance space for poetry readings. Ethan talked about his work as an architect, how he'd lost his passion for it but was slowly rediscovering the joy in creating beautiful spaces. "You see things differently than you did when you first came here," Nina observed one evening. They were sitting on the floor of the cafe, backs against a bookshelf, surrounded by books they'd pulled for a new display. "You helped me do that," Ethan admitted. "You and this place. You gave me space to fall apart without judgment." Nina turned to face him, her expression tender. "You did the hard work yourself. I just provided the coffee." The proximity between them felt suddenly charged. Ethan's heart hammered as he reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. Instead, her fingers curled around his, warm and certain. "Nina," he started, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." That night, when they closed the cafe together, snow falling in thick curtains outside the windows, Nina didn't let go of his hand. They stood in the glow of string lights she'd hung for the holidays, the world reduced to just the two of them and the quiet understanding passing between their linked fingers. When Nina looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the soft light, Ethan knew this was different from anything he'd felt before. With Celeste, love had been performance, anxiety, constant second-guessing. This was calm waters, steady ground, home. He cupped her face gently, giving her time to change her mind. She didn't. Their kiss was soft and slow, tasting of coffee and snowflakes and new beginnings, two careful hearts learning to trust the fragile, beautiful thing growing between them. The message that freed him. Spring came early, bringing with it an unexpected email that appeared in Ethan's inbox on a Tuesday morning in April. The sender's name made his breath catch: Celeste Morgan. He stared at it for a long moment before opening it, Nina's warm presence beside him in her apartment above the cafe, where he'd spent most nights lately. She glanced over from her position curled in the reading chair, book in lap, sensing his tension. "You okay?" she asked gently. "Email from Celeste," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. Nina set down her book. "Do you want privacy?" "No. Stay." He needed her there, her grounding presence. He read the email aloud, his voice growing stronger with each paragraph. Celeste explained everything: the panic attacks she'd hidden, the therapy she'd been too ashamed to seek, the crushing fear of commitment that had nothing to do with Ethan and everything to do with wounds from her childhood she'd never addressed. She'd run because staying felt impossible, but running had finally forced her to confront what she'd been avoiding. She was getting help now. She was sorry for the pain she'd caused. She hoped he'd found happiness. When he finished reading, silence filled the small apartment. Ethan felt something release in his chest, the last knot of hurt and confusion finally loosening. Celeste leaving hadn't been a referendum on his worth. It had been her desperate, messy attempt at survival. "How do you feel?" Nina asked softly. Ethan closed his laptop and crossed to where she sat. He pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her waist, breathing in the scent that had become his definition of peace: vanilla, old books, and the lavender soap she used. "I feel free," he said honestly. "I spent so long thinking I wasn't enough for her. But it was never about that." Nina's hand slid up his chest, her touch igniting warmth through his entire body. "You're more than enough," she murmured. "You always were." He kissed her then, deeply, pouring months of healing and hope and gratitude into the connection between them. She responded with equal passion, her fingers threading through his hair as he lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist. They moved to her bedroom, the afternoon light filtering through sheer curtains, turning everything golden and soft. Their lovemaking was unhurried, tender, hands exploring with reverence, whispered words of affection, the profound intimacy of two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of broken plans and discovered something better than what they'd lost. Afterward, Nina lay with her head on Ethan's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I love you," he said, the words simple and true. "I love you too," she replied, pressing a kiss over his heart. Outside, the world continued its chaotic spin, but here, in this quiet corner they'd created together, Ethan had found his forever. Not the one he'd imagined, but the one he was meant for all along. Celeste's goodbye, devastating as it had been, had cleared the path for this. For Nina, for healing, for a love built on honesty instead of fear. The message that broke him had indeed set him free. Lessons. Sometimes people leave not because we aren't enough, but because they must find themselves first before they can truly love anyone, including themselves. True healing doesn't erase the past or pretend the pain never happened, but transforms our relationship with suffering into wisdom, compassion, and deeper capacity for joy. The deepest connections often grow quietly in the spaces between our loudest heartbreaks, taking root in ordinary moments of kindness when we're too wounded to perform or pretend. Love that arrives gently, without fanfare or drama, asking only that we show up honestly each day, can be the most profound kind of forever we'll ever know.